The hall was electric. The Global Unity Forum, hosted in Washington, D.C., had drawn the most powerful figures from every continent: presidents, tech moguls, climate activists, and military commanders. It was a moment charged with expectation and danger, for never before had the world felt so united and divided at once. A towering screen displayed flags from every nation, rotating alongside glowing keywords: stability, leadership, peace. Beneath them, 1,000 eyes turned toward the spotlighted podium at the center. And then, the music changed. The announcer's voice echoed like a drumbeat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump." The room erupted in applause, half thunderous, half hesitant. Banners waved. A few protesters held signs aloft, quickly subdued by security. Trump stepped forward, suited in navy and red, his signature stride steady, his expression defiant. This was his return, his moment to reassert American greatness not just at home, but across the globe. But as he reached the microphone, even his most seasoned aides could feel it. Something was off. The atmosphere wasn't celebratory, it was combustible. Before we dive into the moment that shocked the world, make sure to subscribe for more unbelievable true stories that change how we see history. This one, it will leave you breathless. Trump began to speak. His opening lines were sharp, nationalist, familiar. They said America was done, they said we would crumble, but guess what? We're still standing. We are the backbone of the free world, and we don't bow to anyone. The crowd clapped, some half-heartedly. In the far right corner of the hall, a rustle stirred. At first, no one noticed. Trump pressed on. "We are here today not to ask for unity, but to demand respect. The era of compromise is over. The United States will lead by example, and by force, if we must." A murmur passed through the crowd. In row 37, a delegate from Italy lowered his translation earpiece. On the balcony above, cameras tilted. A subtle shift of mood, a building pressure. Something unseen was taking root. Suddenly, from the rear entrance, the doors parted. A lone figure walked in. He wore no lanyard, no badge, no visible security, just simple white robes, an understated crucifix, and a quiet, commanding presence. Some gasped, others whispered. Phones lifted, flashes sparked. Pope Leo XIV, the newly elected leader of the Catholic Church, controversial, charismatic, and elusive. Few had seen him outside Vatican broadcasts. Fewer still expected him here. The hall's energy changed. Trump paused mid-sentence, mouth slightly open. Secret Service agents hesitated, unsure whether to move or freeze. And still, the Pope walked, step by step, without breaking gaze toward the stage. It was impossible. No one knew how he'd entered, who had approved his presence, or why he came alone. Yet there he was, unshaken, eyes steady. Trump cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "I'm not sure what—" But the Pope raised his hand. He climbed the stairs slowly. Trump took a step back, instinctively. The crowd watched, breath held, caught in a moment between chaos and revelation. The Pope reached the podium and turned his head. His voice was quiet, but the microphone carried it like thunder. "You are not God." 4 words. That was all he said. And in that instant, everything changed. No one moved. Pope Leo XIV stood at the podium, his eyes scanning the crowd, unwavering. The silence stretched, not empty but charged, as if the room itself had been sealed in thought. Trump's jaw clenched. He looked at his security team, then back at the Pope, who hadn't stepped away, hadn't blinked. The words still echoed, "You are not God." Reporters scrambled to whisper into their mics. Delegates began murmuring across aisles. The forum had become a cathedral, stunned into reverence or confusion. Trump shifted his weight. "With all due respect, Your Holiness, this isn't your forum." "You weren't invited." The Pope didn't respond. Instead, he placed his hand gently on the podium, then leaned slightly forward, not with confrontation, but with calm authority. "I go where the silence becomes dangerous," he said, his voice even. "And this silence here, it threatens to destroy more than just nations." Trump narrowed his eyes, trying to mask the flicker of unease. "America doesn't take moral lectures from unelected priests. We lead. We win. You conquer, the Pope replied, still not raising his voice. But do you heal? A murmur passed through the back rows. Some applauded, others booed. A line had been drawn, not by shouting but by truth. It was no longer about protocol or politics. Something deeper was being unearthed. Behind his robes and calm, who was this Pope? Born Yusuf Farid in Aleppo, Syria, he had survived bombings as a child. His parents, both teachers, had risked everything to get him to safety. He studied in Rome, eventually entering the seminary. Fluent in 7 languages, a student of theology and quantum physics, he rose quietly but quickly. He was elected Pope not by tradition, but by desperation. The world had grown tired of distant holiness. They wanted clarity, conviction, something real. And Leo XIV, named for the lion and the legacy of truth, had brought both. But he was not predictable. Secret Vatican transcripts, later revealed, showed he had argued behind closed doors about the dangers of blind nationalism, of spiritual erosion disguised as patriotism. He had warned again and again that silence was complicity, that faith without confrontation was cowardice. Now here he stood, walking into a firestorm not to denounce, but to awaken. "You are afraid," he said, looking at Trump again, "not of enemies, of irrelevance." Trump scoffed. "This is why people don't listen to the church anymore. You preach weakness." The Pope stepped closer. "I preach memory, the memory of children crushed beneath missiles, the memory of voices erased by ambition, the memory of leaders who forgot they were mortal." It wasn't loud, but it cut deep. Someone in the front row stood, an African diplomat, and began to clap. Then a South American president, then hesitantly a tech CEO. Trump raised a hand, demanding order. "Sit down." "This is propaganda." But it was too late. The room had begun to shift. Outside, the crowd stirred. Protesters looked at each other with new eyes. Reporters turned from their notes to the screen. The Pope's image, gentle, stern, filled the feed. Inside, Trump leaned toward the microphone again, tone sharpened. "You think you've made a statement? You're a guest here." "Don't mistake silence for approval." The Pope finally stepped back. "I do not seek approval," he said softly, "only remembrance." And then, without ceremony, he turned, walking not away, but deeper into the crowd, as if planting a seed in every heart he passed. Trump stood still, gripping the sides of the podium. The air had grown thick, not with fear, but with something more dangerous. Doubt. He could feel it like a ripple moving through the audience, and he hated it. The Pope had not shouted, had not accused, but his words, simple and precise, had carved into the core of Trump's performance. That was the problem. It had been a performance. Now the script was unraveling. He leaned into the microphone again, tone colder, sharper. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we just witnessed was not divine intervention. It was political theater. A man in robes, cloaking globalist rhetoric in spiritual terms." Gasps. Some nodded, others frowned. Trump wasn't backing down. "This isn't a church. This is the Global Unity Forum, a place for strategy, policy, power, not fairy tales and guilt trips." Then, lifting a hand, he pointed to the crowd. "Do you really want peace through sermons? Or through strength? Through military certainty? Through American resolve?" The crowd stirred. A few applauded. But the applause was thinner now, less confident. And then, the Pope's voice returned, though he was no longer at the podium. He had not left the hall. He was standing just below the stage, addressing the delegates directly. No microphone. Just his voice. "You speak of resolve, but where was your resolve when the oceans rose? When your cities burned? When your people cried out for food and you gave them slogans instead?" Trump barked a laugh. "Another parable? Maybe next you'll turn water into taxes." But the Pope didn't flinch. He walked slowly, addressing the room, not the man. "Power that does not listen decays. Strength without mercy devours itself. You measure victory in walls built and borders drawn. But empires built on fear have always fallen." A silence, then murmuring again. Trump interrupted, now visibly agitated. "You call yourself a leader? You're a relic in white preaching from ruins." Leo turned to face him, his tone serene. "And yet the ruins still whisper louder than your walls." The exchange had become more than a disagreement. It was now a duel of visions. Trump's America First bravado clashed with a moral imperative older than politics. Around the hall, phones buzzed, screens lit up with live streams and trending tags. Pope vs. Trump surged. Onlookers outside chanted conflicting cries, some for sovereignty, others for solidarity. Then someone whispered a translation aloud. A Vatican aide had leaked it. What the Pope had said earlier, "You are not God," was not only symbolic, it was also a citation. From a recently unearthed gospel, hidden for centuries beneath a forgotten chapel in Turkey, now confirmed by multiple scholars and quietly authenticated in Rome. The words, translated in ancient Aramaic, echoed, "He who claims dominion over men forgets the breath was given, not taken." The hall trembled, not literally, but spiritually. Trump didn't respond to that. For the first time, he stepped back from the microphone. His expression wasn't anger, it was confusion. Not fear, not yet, but something close. The Pope closed his eyes, then opened them slowly. "You speak of destiny. I speak of consequence." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The weight of those words settled over the room like dusk. And for the first time in the entire forum, no one, not a president, not a delegate, not even Trump, said a word. News anchors around the world scrambled to adjust their coverage. Live feeds from the forum now played in every language, every network. Some governments muted the transmission, others amplified it. Across continents, public squares filled with people watching the same moment, a spiritual confrontation, silent yet deafening, unfolding in real time. In Washington, the forum remained still. Then the Pope raised his eyes, not just to Trump, but to the entire gathering. "The age of conquest is over," he said. "The age of awakening has begun." His voice now carried with eerie precision. No microphone, no amplification, yet each syllable landed as if spoken in the ear of every listener. "This moment is not mine, it is ours," he continued. "For too long, we've worshipped flags more than faces, built towers higher than trust, called fear security and silence peace. No more." He took a breath and then spoke a phrase that no one had heard before. "I call for a third covenant of humanity." The room stirred. A few whispered to their aides, unsure whether this was theological, political, or prophetic. Leo explained, "The first covenant was survival, the second, civilization. But now, we stand at the edge of extinction. Not by war, but by blindness, by greed dressed as growth. By leaders who demand loyalty, but offer no legacy." Trump took a step forward. His voice returned, but fainter. "You're speaking riddles. No one voted for a third covenant. This isn't how history works." The Pope met his gaze. "History doesn't ask for permission. It remembers who listened." And then Leo turned, not toward the elite, but toward the people watching. "This covenant is not written in scripture, but in suffering, in floodwaters, in hunger, in mothers choosing between medicine and food, in children raised on screens, not stories. We can no longer wait for leaders to wake up. The awakening must begin from within." He reached into his robes and held up a simple page. A new charter, handwritten, bearing no seal but his own. It read in 7 languages, "We are stewards, not rulers. We are neighbors, not enemies. We are finite, yet responsible for the infinite." At first it seemed like a gesture. Then world leaders started to react. Canada's Prime Minister stood. Germany's Foreign Minister followed. The President of Ghana raised a hand. One by one they asked for copies, not to debate, but to understand. And then something no one expected. Donald Trump paused. His eyes, usually fixed and calculating, now wavered. In that instant his mind wandered, not to headlines or polls, but to his mother's Bible, a frail hand flipping through worn pages, her voice reciting verses before bedtime, her funeral, the silence afterward, the burden he never spoke of. He looked at the Pope again, not as a rival, but as a reminder. He stepped back from the podium. The crowd gasped. Then quietly he turned to the Pope. "Finish it." It wasn't surrender. It wasn't defeat. But it was something rare. Recognition. Leo nodded and stepped forward once more. He did not speak of politics or doctrine. He spoke of wonder, of science and spirit walking together, of the duty to uplift before we collapse. He ended not with a decree, but with a question. If not now, then when? And as the hall sat in silence again, the applause began. Slow, unsure, but spreading. By the time it reached full strength, Trump had already stepped aside. The world woke up different. Headlines clashed in confusion. Trump silenced by Pope. Third Covenant sparks global shockwave. Faith meets politics in historic standoff. Markets wobbled. Some collapsed. Oil dipped. Gold soared. But amid the financial chaos, something stranger happened. Churches filled. Not just in Rome or Washington, but in cities where religion had long faded. Not for rituals, but for stillness. People sat without speaking, listening, not to sermons, but to each other. Protests resumed, as always, but there was a shift. Placards didn't scream for war or division. They asked questions about food, about the future, about what kind of world their children would inherit. And in private quarters at the White House, Trump sat alone. The cameras had left. The crowds were gone. No tweets. No applause, just the echo of words he couldn't unhear. "You are not God." Aides approached him with documents, with briefings, with excuses. He waved them away. One aide, braver than the rest, finally asked, "Sir, what are we telling the press?" Trump looked up. "Tell them I listened." No one expected it. No one believed it. But he meant it. Later that week, he agreed to a closed interview. No cameras, no filters. He was asked what had changed. He answered slowly. "I thought strength was volume, that if I spoke louder, I was right." But he didn't shout. He whispered. And I heard it more clearly than anything in years. The interviewer leaned in. "Do you regret stepping aside?" Trump paused. "No. For once I didn't lead. I followed." And it felt right. Across the ocean, in Vatican City, Pope Leo XIV walked alone through the gardens behind St. Peter's. He refused interviews. He declined accolades. When asked about what came next, he simply said, "This is not the end, it is the opening." He met with scientists, artists, ethicists, not to preach but to listen. Plans began forming for a new ethical charter, not tied to any religion or government. A moral framework, global in scope, designed to outlast empires. And though many remained skeptical, something undeniable had begun. People looked at each other longer. They spoke slower. Online, amid the noise, voices emerged calling for deeper connection, not louder division. For weeks, the phrase lingered in headlines, on walls, in hearts. If not now, then when? World leaders debated, some rejecting the message, others embracing it. But no one ignored it. Because history, once again, had shifted, not with violence, but with vision. And for Donald Trump, once the symbol of defiance, now the unexpected bridge, his image changed. Not entirely, not instantly, but enough that even critics stopped and wondered. He didn't kneel, he didn't repent, but he remembered. And that somehow was enough. In time, the Third Covenant became a movement, not a religion, not a party, a conversation. One the world had waited too long to begin. And it had started not with a vote or a law or a war, but with 4 words. You are not God. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and click the next video to witness another powerful turning point in modern history. There's more to come, and you won't want to miss what happens next.